What's cracking, everyone? My name is Ryan, and today we are going to be checking out the Meze Empyrean 2. Let's get into it. Now, the Empyrean 2 is an open-back planar magnetic headphone from Meze Audio. It retails in at $29.99, and that is $2,999 for those of you out there keeping track. And before I get into this, I want to send a big thank you to Audio46, who did provide me with this headphone so that I could get all of my thoughts, all of my opinions out. And by the way, really quick, if you haven't already, check out Audio46 online. They sell a plethora of products from headphones, IEMs, DACs, amps, DAPs, portable devices, you name it. I'm not officially affiliated with them. They didn't pay me to say that. I just feel like I want to mention that because they have supported this channel so very well, and I want to support them back. Check them out. All right, with that out of the way, guys, let's get into this headphone and really talk about the nuts and bolts of the Empyrean 2. Hey everyone, just hit 2,000 subscribers. Want to say a big thank you to all of you for that. My 2024 resolution is to hit 5,000 by the end of the year. So please join the channel, subscribe, like the videos. I would highly appreciate that. And I now have a Patreon if you'd like to join me there and support the channel as well. And back to the video. All right, and I don't want to go too nuts over the bolts of this headphone, but I will tell you that the driver type of this is a Renaro isodynamic hybrid array driver that we've seen on something like the Meze Elite. These are neodymium magnets, but if you really want to know more about just the technology and everything in this headphone, don't listen from me. I would highly recommend go on the website and read about it for yourself. I'll put the link down below because Meze just pays a lot of attention into designing their headphones, and they spend a lot of time on that, and they, hand make individually each one of these headphones. So it's worth a read to look into all the technology behind this, especially if you're going to spend this kind of money. I would hope you want to know more about that. So I will tell you that the driver is 32 ohms of impedance, and it is 105 dB per 1 volt. So this is technically a very easy to drive headphone from that standpoint of giving it power and giving it volume. Now, I will tell you that in my findings, this is going to pair differently depending on different amps. Synergy is going to matter, and I am going to save the amp portion towards the end of this video. So you're definitely going to want to check that out to see the differences that I found with different amps that I paired up with this. But let's continue in talking about those nutty bolts. All right, so the headphone itself, I mean, I had to take time when I first opened the box to just look at the beautiful design that they have made with the Empyrean 2. You're going to see this etching on the cups on the outside here, the CNC machine finishing that they do. These silver accents on the cups, this is the same that we would see on something like the Meze Elite, how they had that on the outside of the cups. It's almost like this fingerprint look. I love the look of the aesthetics of this headphone. The adjustment system here is super smooth, but it's tight. It will stay in place. Now, the headband itself feels really lightweight. These are all high-grade, high-quality materials, by the way. The strap, I do believe this is a leather strap, but it didn't say so for sure on the site, but that's just my guess based on the feel of it. It's very thick and just moves with you very easily. Says Empyrean on the outside. Very unique look. Now, these do terminate to a mini XLR connection, just like we would see on something like ZMF headphones. So if you already have ZMF headphones, you're going to have cables that are going to fit this, but we will talk about the cable here in a second. The pads on this, these are very cushiony. Now, these are the default pads. They're actually called the Duo pads. And then you also get a second set of pads in the box. Let's talk about in the box really fast because I definitely don't want to skip over that. For $3,000, they take care of you. And I am very happy that they do that. You see this nice dangly cable here, this beautiful cable off of the stand. Well, this is the cable that you actually get with the headphone by choice. You can get a silver cable like this one, or you can choose for a copper one. Now, if you buy those individually from Meze, they are going to set you back $300 to $400. They include it in the box with the headphone. And you can also choose the termination type, the length, all those different things with the cable. The pads like I said, you get the duo pads that are on the Empyrean 2. Now, these are the default pads they recommend with this headphone. However, you do also get these alternate pads. Now, these are Alcantara angled pads. So they are going to obviously change up your sound a little bit, which we will definitely talk about. Now, the duo pads are a mixture of leather and Alcantara material, hence the name duo, but they are not angled. So definitely note that. Now, the total weight of the headphone is 385 grams without the pads, because depending on the pads that you choose, it is going to change the weight a little bit on the headphone. Comfort wise, yeah, Meze knows what they're doing here, guys. I mean, they evenly distribute the weight so well. I have never had discomfort wearing any Meze headphone, to be perfectly honest. This one's obviously no different. And you get your cup swivel, you get cup rotation. They are displayed beautifully inside the case that you get, which I skipped over the case. Let me show you that. Now, this is actually a suitcase style headphone case. If you can hear that, that is a high grade ABS plastic. And this is actually leather with the handle that you get. Now, lastly, I would say aesthetically, that is very subjective, of course, but I dig the look of this headphone. I really just like how it looks when you get it out, when you put it on your head. But I gotta say, if you're an audiophile like me and you dig the look and you put it on your head, it takes up a lot of circumference around your head. So don't go running off to your friends, your spouse or whatever, and be like, hey, check these out. If they're not an audiophile, they're going to be like, you look ridiculous, because they're probably used to Beats or something like that. I don't know. But I'm just saying, like, these look amazing, but they do take up a lot of space on your head. But we're audiophile. What the hell do we care, right? All right. Now, with all that being said, guys, I do think it's time that we talk about the sound of the Empyrean 2. Right, so for my sound impressions, I am going to stick to mostly the duo pads, simply because those are my preferred choice of pads, and I can see why Meze chose those as the default pads as well. Don't worry, I am going to talk about the angled pads, because I definitely spent plenty of time with the angled pads, just wasn't my preferred signature. So the duo pads, I can tell you the sound they present you is going to be a nice, full, and lush low end that has a little bit of slam to it, which, sometimes can even be a little bit more. It doesn't extend super deep, but it has enough extension for a planar to be very full and to give you good quality of information on that low end. As it heads into the mid-range, that upper part of the low end into the lower mid-range is also very full. It almost tricked me up when I first listened to this headphone to think that it was a relaxed mid-range. It's not relaxed, it's just a smooth listen. And there's a lot of resolution and details there in that mid-range. As we go into the upper parts, getting into the treble region, I can tell you that vocalists and things like that do sound very good with this headphone, but they are not shouty. They are not pushed towards your face or anything like that on an aggressive nature. And then as we get into that treble, it starts to be a smooth treble, but you do get some peakiness there. And that peakiness is definitely something I want to focus on and talk about as we get into more details into the sound. Now, when you switch this to the Alcantara angled pads, a couple of the biggest differences that you're going to notice. One is that low end's going to drop out a little bit. It's not going to be quite as full. It's going to be, I don't want to say thinner, but just isn't quite as present on the dynamic nature of it as well. So you're not going to get as much of that slamminess or punchiness of that low end, even into the lower mid range. But it does present you with a more of a brighter top end. The peakiness maintains from what we talked about on the duo pad, so it doesn't necessarily get worse. It just gets a little more airier, and it is a little bit more open of a sound stage as well. So I can see how the angled pads would be for somebody that's into the more audiophile type music. In fact, Meze says this on their website. I'm doing this because I've got my laptop there with the website pulled up. But they say this on their website, and they're spot on, because I think of somebody that likes classical music and jazz and things, live recordings, and wants their music to be a little more open and doesn't care so much about punch and slam and dynamics and things like that, and that more energetic low end of music. It's okay. that's where the angled pads are going to come into play and give you a little bit more of that information for music that you might want to dissect just a little bit further. I do want to dissect the sound that I just talked about, and let's do that next. Now I'm going to go ahead and kick this off with a track example called Kicks by the Sandbox Percussion and Jerome Begin. Now this is more of a, not necessarily a musical type track, it's more of kind of a demonstration track in my opinion, because it's called Kicks because it's kick drums. Kick drums, I think, are a great example for this headphone because, you know, if you look, you'll notice that kick drums a lot of times will go down around that 50, 60 hertz mark. And that is kind of the meat and potatoes of this headphone on the low end response. And that's where you're going to really plateau on that response. It is such a good track to sample on this headphone to really feel the attack that you get on the kick drums, because there is attack. Now around the 214 mark, it picks up quite a bit and it's boom, 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 boom. And when it's doing that, it's still having attack. So that's showing you that not only does this have the speed to keep up, of course, but it maintains some of the dynamics there. And again, that's with the duo pads. Now, switching over to the angled pads, that attack's just not there. It's there, don't get me wrong. It's just very faint compared to this. And again, why I preferred the duo pads. Now, I do want to talk further into this and bring up another track, and that is Why So Serious off of the Dark Knight movie soundtrack. And this one around the 320 mark, this is a classic track now that I like to sample for deep, deep sub bass. This part of the track, that's where you get that deep, deep sub bass. And there are only times where you're going to hear and feel that on this headphone. And I think that's when it's going into more of that probably 50, 60 hertz region on up, because it's more of that just soft felt sound that you're going to get on this headphone, showing off the fact that it will not extend quite that deep. Not like the tungsten double-sided did on that particular track. This one doesn't go down quite that low. I'm okay with that. It's not like it's non-existent. You get the information there. It's just not as engaging of a sound. And as you can guess, with the angled pads, it's really just non-existent at all and not something I really enjoyed even slightly listening on the angled pads. Now, as we move into kind of the lower part of the mid-range into the upper bass region, there is another track, Moon Represents My Heart by Zhao Peng. And even though I still can't understand, you know, the language of the singing and everything going on here, his voice is absolutely beautiful. And he has that voice that registers down deep and can go up high. And the down deep part is really what I was listening for here on this headphone. And it is very full. And you still get very engaged. And there is breath. And there is resolution of this track. And it just shows off just how well this headphone handles just music. All right, and so I've given you some easy listening things, you know, some fun examples, some movie scores, but now I want to pep things up when we talk about this, you know, mid-range response of this headphone. I want to talk about drums and metal and Avatar and the song Gonna Wanna Riot. Now, this song at the very beginning has very fast drums that are going to give you really good rhythm and pace with this headphone and keep up and give you dynamics and just make this a fun sound from the get-go. And I think that's what makes the duo pads more of a fun pad example as well, because not only are they fun, but they're detailed too. And that track's a good example for that. Now to go further into that, there is also the track Parasite by Gogo Penguins. Now, remember when I talked about the mid-range sometimes seems a little bit on the relaxed nature? Well, this track's a good example about how it's not. It's relaxed in the fact that maybe you could call that decay of notes and things, that it's just not super fast off of them because it's going to give you some information and, you know, give you maybe some damping factor and that kind of thing. And I think this track showcases that with the duo pads. Whereas if you switch over to the angled pads on a track like this, that's when you might get just a little bit more clarity and just a little bit more openness of that track, if that's what you prefer. Now me, I didn't mind a more closed-in feeling with that kind of track just to make it a smooth listen, but you know, especially around, I think it is the 320 mark, it's somewhere around the 3-minute mark, that it really picks up and has a lot of instruments involved. And I am happy to report with the duo pads, like there's no kind of muddying up going on. I mean, I certainly would hope not with this expensive of a headphone, but there's not. I mean, it's very detailed, while still being very smooth in that mid range. Now, I do want to go and talk about that high end, and I do want to talk about the one flaw that I find in this headphone. And we're going to address the elephant in the room with the track Elephant Gun by Beirut. Yeah, I did that on purpose. Well, this track shows off sibilance, and this headphone has sibilance. That is really the only time of the treble that I find it to be bright, though, for me. I am not as overly sensitive as I used to be with brightness and treble, but I gotta tell you that this headphone will pick up sibilance on sibilant type tracks. When I think of like Patricia Barber or somebody like that has a lot of sibilance in her voice at times, Adele can have that. This headphone will show it. It does not showcase it like, say, the Aria Organic can or, Hi-Fi Man headphones tend to do. So it's not super bright, but it's sibilance. And, for this cost and what you're paying for and everything, that is one thing that there's peakiness there that you have to be warned of. If you're somebody that's very, sensitive to that nature, I got to tell you that at least for all the amp pairings I've had, I have not been able to really tame that at all without doing EQ or something like that. Now, going to the angled pads, obviously it's not going to fix that. That sibilance is still going to be there, but it's going to be a little bit more airy, and it's going to give you a little bit more space and information and things. So again, if we're talking about classical tracks, sibilance and things isn't really going to matter as much, of course, unless you got, classical singers or something like that going on in the mix that have some sibilance. I didn't find it to be harsh or anything on cymbals and things. Sometimes, some cymbals or synth instruments can kind of share that space with sibilance. I will say that probably on some electronic tracks, I did notice it on some of those synthesized type instruments, especially if it wasn't the best recorded track. But yeah, that is the part of this headphone that is going to be its downfall, is sometimes that peakiness that you get into the high end of the headphone. Before I leave this topic of the high end of this headphone, I should also bring up one more track, and that is the Ancient Dragon Lansseax. I'm trying to sound fancy here. It's off the Elden Ring soundtrack. And by the way, gaming with this headphone is a ton of fun because it's got enough stage to make it excitable for gaming. And it just games really well. Anyways, to go back to that track, this track kind of gives an example of what I'm talking about, that it's not super wide though. So this track is very energetic. It's a moment where you fight a dragon in Elden Ring. So, it's supposed to bring you in and just get you really excited. It definitely got me jived when I listened to it on this headphone, and actually made me fire up Elden Ring on this headphone and start playing that game. And that's why I said this game's really well. I did notice that I got a little bit of height out of this when I listened to tracks that had chorus and things like that, where I knew there was a stage going up further. I definitely got that sense, especially when I listen to tracks where sounds were coming from up here, end gaming and things like that. I definitely got that sense. So I think it does have good height, just not a ton of width. And it's almost kind of like, I don't know, like this, if I was to describe sound as an air traffic controller, something like that. I think they're on the runway. Anyway, let's talk about the synergy of this next. I tried this with quite a few different amps because I happen to have quite a few in-house right now that I'm trying out. The Woo Audio WA7 Fireflies, I do have that one right now. That is a hybrid tube amp. What I can tell you that does with this headphone, it gives it some fun engagement in the low end. It makes it thicker, gives it some attack, and makes that, again, fun. It kind of loosens up the mid-range though and makes it almost a little bit too relaxed. And that can be fun depending on the type of tracks that you're listening to. Now, it didn't do anything from the high end, but it was very easy to drive on that particular headphone amp, and is one that I could see somebody enjoying this headphone on. I also tried it on the Shit Midgard, and it was mid. It was okay. There was nothing great that the Halo topology there really did for this headphone, but there was nothing bad either. I didn't feel like I got as much engagement out of that low end and the dynamics and just punch, slam, things like that from the duo pads out of that headphone amp, that it really didn't make it quite as excitable for me. Now on the Mojo 2, which I'm also listening to, kind of along the same lines as the Midgard, with one caveat to that. There's EQ on that. And that can be a lot of fun. And when I did that with this headphone, it took to that really well and suddenly gave it some of those things that I like, which is a little bit more of a low end. And you can even kind of tame that, sibilance down a little bit if you want to do that. So the Mojo 2 paired really well with this. It drove this headphone perfectly fine, and it was a lot of fun to test. I did try this on my IHA6 as well. Now, for a solid state amp, that was the most solid amp that I had in house that I tried with this. It just didn't quite have that same amount of low end I've talked about, but it was almost there. It probably was a little bit more intimate of a sound than my other amps I tried, but I still thought it was a fantastic sound on the IHA6. My favorite though was the HA3A. And I'm kind of finding that on a lot of my headphones, to be honest, guys. My HA3A is just a solid tube amp, but that is the one that gave me all of these impressions that I'm talking to you guys about. That is the one I use the most with this headphone. It gives it a low end, just attack to it, and mid-range attack to it, and doesn't do anything to the high end, but it does actually give it a little bit more space to kind of expand out like tubes can sometimes do, and was just such a lush and smooth listen with this headphone. It was like the perfect match for this headphone, and I really enjoyed that listen the most, to no surprise. Like I said, I love that amplifier. All right, so is this headphone on the top of my list for a headphone that I would recommend around $3,000? That has been really, really tough for me to answer. If I'm looking at this from a total package, it absolutely is. From everything you get in the box, the dual pads, the cable, the case, the build quality, and the comfort, it absolutely is. And I can see why so many people are hyping this headphone up. For the sound signature itself, I like the tungsten double-sided more. I just did. You have to be able to drive it, but I did like it more. It suited me better. It didn't have that peakiness in the treble, and I'm nitpicking here at the nitpicks of this headphone to say that, but I still understand why somebody would love this headphone, and definitely kind of is up there in one of the top headphones I've heard by far for sure. Now, compare it to something like my Aria Organic. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think this beats the Aria Organic, but it's also 3 times the price. I gotta say though, the Organic is a little wider. It is a little bit punchier. It has a little more fun of a signature that can be more aggressive as well. So if you don't like some aggression there, especially into that upper mid-range, it can be just a little bit more forceful with that headphone, and also a little bit more unnatural compared to something like this. But it's kind of a difference there that some people may prefer because they want something to sound a little more open and also pretty much sound like that no matter what you pair it up with. I gotta say, the Organic really does kind of blend to different different amplifiers really well. I need to stop drinking. So this, I really don't, I didn't drink that much. This headphone though is fantastic, guys. And if anybody were to want to go out and purchase this, absolutely, I can see why you would. Meze knocked it out of the park. It is a very strong contender for 2024. And yeah, that's kind of where I stand with it. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. If so, smash that like button. And please, guys, join the channel. I am really trying to reach 5,000 by the end of the year. I thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.